From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping shaking hands on the sidelines of a summit in San Francisco. Biden stressing the need to keep communication open.
We haven't always agreed, which was not a surprise to anyone, but our meetings have always been candid, straightforward, and useful.
Back in Washington, a bill that avoids a government shutdown making its way from the House now to the Senate. Lawmakers poised to begin voting on that resolution soon.
We'll get the view on the budget showdown from both chambers as we catch up with Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina and Congressman French Hill from Arkansas, both joining us this hour, and those conversations are still ahead. So, Joe, we are waiting this evening to see if the Senate does indeed vote on this continuing resolution. Two parts. We'll fund the government partially until January 19th, partially until February 2nd. Once again, we see the can kicked down the road in terms of domestic politics, but a lot to discuss with geopolitics as well.
Well, that's for sure. And we're talking about the same bill that passed the House around this time yesterday. Yes. The Senate is doing away with its own version. It looks like it will codify what happened in the House. And so, again, we avoid a shutdown. It's going to be a different conversation in January, and we're balancing that with what's happening on the other side of the country today, Kaylee, as President Biden meets with Xi Jinping. In fact, here's a taste of their encounter earlier today in San Francisco.
The China-U.S. relationship, which is the most important bilateral relationship in the world, for two large countries like China and the United States, turning their back on each other is not an option. It is unrealistic for one side to remodel the other, and conflict and confrontation has unbearable consequences for both sides.
Anne-Marie Hordern is joining us now from the APEC summit in San Francisco. So, Anne-Marie, we just heard there from Xi this idea that neither side is going to be able to remodel the other. But are they going to at least be able to make progress today? How should we measure it?
Well, I think the fact that these two individuals, the leaders of the biggest economies, two biggest economies in the world, are sitting down shows that they do want a different path forward, that both want to be able to manage this relationship and get something out of this relationship. For Xi Jinping, we know that he was pressing economic issues when it comes to the sanctions and tariffs regimes that are placed on Beijing from the United States. We do know that's something the U.S. does not want to meddle with at the moment. But you can see here that both these individuals are looking to re-engage in some way. President Xi saying this is the most important bilateral relationship in the entire world, U.S. and China, and President Biden saying that they want to be able to manage this competitiveness so it doesn't veer into conflict. He also has a similar rhetoric we've heard from the Biden administration that they want to just get back to a normal correspondence. What else was discussed and what the deliverables potentially at the end of this on the fringes, whether it be fentanyl, whether it be Boeing deals, or say, of course, you know, when it comes to the military-to-military communications, which was a huge priority for the Biden administration, I'm sure President Biden is going to address that when he speaks to reporters this evening. And we should note, President Biden and Xi have wrapped up. So that bilateral meeting is over, and Biden is likely going to be meeting with his advisors now on how much he should share with the world.
All right, Anne-Marie Hordern, we thank you, as always, for the reporting, checking in from San Francisco, and we'll be hearing more from the president later in his solo news conference, as Anne-Marie mentioned. Joining us now around the table here in Washington, Bloomberg's Kate Davidson and Nick Wadhams. Great to see both of you here. Nick, we were just showing to our viewers a list of priorities, the agenda for each leader here. How much overlap is there between the two?
Well, I think there's a fair amount of overlap in what they conceive could be possible right now. So they both want to, as the Biden administration says, put a floor under this relationship, keep it from getting any worse. They met a year ago. Things got a lot worse in the time since then. Now they're trying to get things back on track. The question for me is, okay, well, what can they actually do? Yes, I mean, this was a few hours of meetings. They have had a parade of U.S. officials going to China over the last several months. But there are still so many things that divide the U.S. and China. I mean, we have both sides in the South China Sea accusing each other's militaries of provocative behavior. That's only getting worse. A lot of these tariffs remain in place. And then there's just so much pressure back at home from the China hawks on the Hill. It's tough to see space for real progress here that would fundamentally change the terms of this relationship.
Well, it's a very good point. And of course, we heard President Biden, and I would imagine, Joe, that he reiterated something similar to Xi Jinping today, that he does not intend to seek a decoupling from China. And yet, when you look at kind of what you were referring to with some of the tariffs that are in place, you're already seeing trade flows slow down, a moving of supply chains out of there. Foreign direct investment has slowed down. The flow of people has slowed down, partially maybe because of COVID. But economically, Kate, it does seem like these two economies are moving a bit farther apart, and both of them are dealing with fragilities right now that may just add to the intensity of the need to make sure nothing gets too far off track.
Sure. Well, I think, certainly among economists in that space, there was just a huge realization during the pandemic, right, about how reliant the two countries are on each other and the two countries' economies. Even just, I think it hit home for regular people, right? The things that they were used to buying and getting so quickly from China that were suddenly no longer available or took much longer. And those are the kinds of trade issues that I think resonate with people, resonate with regular Americans. And it's why this sort of populism, as Nick was mentioning, the China hawks really have a strong voice right now, I think in part because of those reasons. So sure, a lot of companies and businesses are looking at ways that they can lessen the impact of something like that if it ever happens again. So there's a little bit of decoupling, but they are still so reliant on each other. It's hard to see a meaningful change in terms of the economic reliance and relationship.
Well, President Biden must be taking some solace in the fact that it appears we're not going to shut down the government at the end of this week. He's focusing on the matter at hand. And we may as well talk about what's happening inside the Capitol, where House Speaker Mike Johnson talked about budget negotiations.
We have broken the fever. We are not going to have a massive omnibus spending bill right before Christmas. That is a gift to the American people, because that is no way to legislate.
So still a lot of questions, though, about what happens after we get past the next hurdle here, Nick, and a lot of folks are asking about the supplemental budget request that came from the White House weeks ago now for funding for Israel and Ukraine. I know there are senators who are saying they might be able to get something back together before the end of the year, but it's entirely likely we're going to be here in January talking about this, right?
I mean, this is the challenge. They put more than $100 billion in that supplemental request, most of it for Ukraine. Right now, the indication is, maybe they would be able to do that Israel money first and then Ukraine. But, I mean, if you're Ukraine and you need these munitions to fend off Russia, I mean, there really is no indication that Congress is going to be able to pass this anytime soon. The Pentagon refuses to say when they will run out of money. We know they have said they have about $6 billion left over in equipment to be able to send to Ukraine. But, they've also said that they're starting to throttle back the size of these packages that they send. So the question is not, okay, are we going to run out in the next month or maybe 6 weeks? It doesn't look like that'll happen. But the problem is we're just getting no indication from Congress that they're going to be willing to send this money over anytime soon. So it's a huge question mark.
Absolutely. Basically, all spending is still a question mark because, sure, a continuing resolution keeps funding the government until January, but there is a massive funding battle that still needs to happen in terms of not just emergency funding, but just appropriations. And we know a lot of conservatives, Kate, want to exercise more fiscal restraint because we do have a very large U.S. deficit. It is something ratings agencies are now paying attention to as the fiscal trajectory of the United States. So ultimately, what happens in these spending packages could really matter for the creditworthiness of the United States, depending on what they agree to.
For sure. I mean, I think the issue that we've seen time and time again, I think it's very appropriate that this shutdown next sort of deadline would be around Groundhog Day, because it certainly feels like that, right? I mean, it's the same conversation, but I think the fact is that non-defense discretionary spending levels, as a share of GDP, have really come down a lot, and it's on the revenue side where you're seeing this problem this year, at least on deficit. So I think that there is probably a important conversation to be had about fiscal restraint and where we can, trim some spending. But it's really you're going to get the most bang for your buck in areas that lawmakers on both sides don't want to touch: Social Security, Medicare. So I think that they're going to continue to face a challenge of identifying places to cut where they can get bipartisan support. That's always the challenge, and it's still going to be a challenge in January.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So are we just talking about a shutdown at that point? Thank you both so much for joining us, Kate Davidson and Nick Wadhams from Bloomberg. We really appreciate your time. Now let's go straight, as we talk about the funding battle ahead, to Capitol Hill. Republican Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina is joining us now from there. Senator, thank you very much for your time this evening. When are you voting on this continuing resolution, and should we assume that you will vote for it?
I will vote for it. We may have one amendment, I think, offered by Senator Paul before we move on to it. We will have final passage tonight, so we will avert another shutdown threat, actually early by our standards. So I'm glad that we're doing it a couple of days early, but we've got to get out of this cycle. This is a very expensive process. We need a consistent, longer-term view of spending. And to the point in your prior segment, we've also got to get serious about our debt. We are going to reach a point to where we'll run out of our credit line. We're reaching a point now where mandatory spending alone will consume all the revenue coming into the U.S. government. What do we do with the 20% that's not mandatory spending? So we have to have a serious discussion about that at the same time that we're dealing with the conflict in Ukraine, Israel, and other threats.
When is the Senate going to have a serious conversation then, Senator, about those very issues? Can you salvage this supplemental budget request in December, potentially send it back to the House and get it done in time for the new year? Or is this going to be piecemeal and a wait for Israel and Ukraine?
Well, I hope, we're involved in discussions, and we should be instructed by the president's request. The president did request funding for Israel, for Ukraine, for Taiwan, but also for border security. And so we have to get the four legs of that stool together. We're actively working on a border security strategy, which I think is critically important. Of course, we have to support Israel, and I am 100% behind sustaining the investment for Ukraine. We're at it's not quiesce, but we're in a lowered state of hostilities right now in Ukraine. But once we get through the winter and we get back into the fighting season in the spring, it's going to be critically important for us to have resources. Now, one advantage that we do have is that we have nearly 50 nations cooperating and participating, helping support Ukraine. So I think that even as we are concerned with U.S. flow of money and materials, we can also call on our partners, I think, to smooth out the edges. But at the end of the day, I, for one, would like a package that has border security, Israel and Ukraine funding, and Taiwan funding as well.
Senator, when it comes to the issue of border security, though, that and just more widely efforts in Congress to do something about immigration have been tried time and again, and it's obviously not that easy to execute, as we have learned. Is there real danger in trying to force a border security measure with the funding for these countries that are in active conflict as we speak?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to keep in mind that the Biden administration has allowed a fourfold increase in crossings over the border. 1.5 million people, we simply don't know who they are or where they are. They're called known gotaways. There's no rational basis for somebody to try and evade being apprehended by Border Patrol because you're released within a matter of a couple of days. So it raises a question about the backgrounds of those people. We cannot diminish the threat that this unabated flow that Biden has allowed. It's a fourfold increase. Now, I will tell you that the reason it was instructive that President Biden had border security in his request, he has a problem. And it's a national security, homeland security problem, but it's also a political problem. So I don't think that Republicans are the only ones who recognize that we've got to make progress on border security, and we've got to get it done. Now, to the point on timing, the thing that worries me or the thing that frustrates me about Washington is when we set a deadline, we almost never get something done early. I hope that we break the cycle on this one. I hope that we have a definitive answer for Israel, Ukraine, and the American people on border security before Christmas.
The House may not feel the same way about that, Senator. What do you think of the new Speaker as a working partner on these issues, seeing what he's done so far with that supplemental request. He bifurcated Israeli funding, passed it, and it sits.
Yeah. Well, I think that those of us who support both Israel and Ukraine funding believe that we should be moving that as a bloc. We cannot have a lapse in Ukraine funding. That could have been a strategy on the part of some members of the House who apparently do not want to support sustaining the Ukraine effort. I completely disagree with them. I think that history will remember them in a very, very negative light, I should say. So we've got to work together. I do think that the Speaker is doing the best with the hand that he's dealt. And this is a case where I think the Republicans need to understand that the American people want us to lead. And leading means we have to address these pressing problems. And we've got about a month, a little over a month to solve this. And I will work very hard and hopefully work on a productive basis with the House members to get the supplemental passed. But it is go time, and I expect leadership out of the House. I expect leadership out of the Senate.
So, Senator, if the Senate were to send Israel and Ukraine funding together in a package to the House, you would expect that Speaker Johnson will indeed bring that to the floor?
I hope so. And if you take a look at the way that he got the CR done, he had to do it on the suspension calendar. He did not have sufficient Republican support to make it a party line vote. I think that the Speaker is going to have to be creative. I do not envy him. I was Speaker of the House of the state legislature. There's no way you can give me Speaker over this body right now because it's very, very difficult to manage. So I compliment him on being able to get this done, the CR done in time. But now we're going to have to work on a bipartisan basis to solve these problems. The global world order is literally at stake, and that should be a reason that everybody sets aside their partisan preferences, like my own, and get this done.
Which brings us to the matter of military readiness, Senator, and I wonder if you have a message to military families who might be watching or listening this evening after the Senate Rules Committee made some changes. It was a party line vote, I realize, to move promotions en bloc, as we call it, in the face of this blockade by Senator Tommy Tuberville. The rules have changed. The Democrats, as we're hearing, have given you the tool to act, Senator. Do you plan to use it and move these promotions before the holidays?
Keep in mind that it's what they call a standing order. So the rules, I don't want to get too technical, but it's a standing order that only exists for this Congress. And it's only as good as the ability to convince assuming every Democrat votes for it, 9 Republicans to vote for it to move nominations. So we've got the mechanics to work through. We absolutely are dealing with the readiness and national security challenge, and we need to get these nominations through. I completely agree with Senator Tuberville on the policy issue. I, for one, think the president is breaking the law, and I believe there will be a lawsuit brought against him for appropriating these taxpayer dollar funds. That's going to take time to fix. We need a solution soon, because we're going to reach a point where almost 3/4 of the officers affected by Senator Tuberville's hold are going to be affected by this policy. We've got to get past it. The last thing we need right now is our men and women leaders in the military thinking about this with all the threats we're facing worldwide.
You think that these promotions will be handled then before year end?
I think you're going to see some movement. And I think it all depends on how you package some of the nominations. You get down to the specific positions, the specific posts. But my guess is that it will be used. Will it be used to address the nearly 400 or approaching 400? Probably not. But certainly I think we have to consider tools like this for some of the more critical promotions. Because you have to understand, you can't even fill a post unless a promotion happens.
Of course. It sounds like a lot of promotions that could be confirmed in the next couple of months then. Senator Thom Tillis, we thank you for your view from the Capitol and from North Carolina. Coming up, President Biden and Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping meeting face-to-face for the first time in a year. More on that still ahead. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
planet Earth is big enough for the two countries to succeed, and one country's success is an opportunity for the other. I firmly believe in the promising future of the bilateral relationship.
It was Chinese President Xi Jinping earlier speaking through a translator as he met with Joe Biden. For more, we bring in Amy Gadsden, Executive Director of China Initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania. Thanks for being with us. The president sent a tweet after that meeting and said he valued the conversation. What part of that conversation do you think he valued? What's he going to tell us in the news conference later on tonight?
Well, thanks for having me here tonight. I think, both sides have spent a lot of time over the last few weeks dialing down expectations about what to expect from today's meetings. But the meeting is useful. If we think about, Nixon came home from China in 1972, he sat on the plane and he scribbled down his notes. And he had three categories of analysis. He wrote down, what do they want? What do we want? What do we both want? And if we think about that framework for today's meetings, what does China want? They want reassurance that the United States does not support Taiwan's independence. They want reassurance that the U.S. is not trying to contain China or start a Cold War. And they want to get foreign investment back on track. What do we want? We want assurances that China's not going to meddle in the Middle East and that it stays its hand in Ukraine and checks Russian power there. We want reassurance that China's not going to destabilize East Asia and invade Taiwan, continue risky maneuvers in the South China Sea. And we want China to cease its cyber espionage and stop stealing U.S. secrets. And then there's what we both want, and I think that's what we're going to hear after the summit today. So what do we both want? We want to prevent an accident from leading to a major military crisis. We want to stop the hemorrhaging in the U.S.-China relationship, and we need to find more areas of common ground, whether that's climate, AI and nuclear weapon systems, or fighting fentanyl. And I think it's that third category where we'll really hear some progress today.
Well, Amy, listening to you outline what China is trying to achieve here, a lot of it being foreign direct investment. For China, is this meeting with President Biden of equal or greater importance to the meeting he's about to have with business executives who can actually make that investment into China later this evening?
I think they're both important, right? I mean, over the last couple of months, American executives have expressed a lot of fear about going back to China. And so it's really important that Biden and Xi stand together. And as Biden, said to Xi at the beginning of the meeting this afternoon, you and I have to understand each other leader to leader. This relationship starts at the top. And I think American executives and others, academics, students, will look at this, the handshake, the smiles, and say, okay, it's okay to go back to China. So yes, the meeting with business executives is important, but the meeting between the two presidents is even more important.
A lot of people said in advance of this meeting that the biggest goal is to get to the next meeting. Amy, will there be one?
Certainly, I'd like to think so. I mean, obviously, we've invested a lot of time over the last few months sending our cabinet ministers over to China, trying to reestablish connections, whether it's commerce, treasury, state, John Kerry, and the climate discussions. I have to imagine that there will be more meetings to come after this.
Well, and I wonder what the U.S. is going to have to give here in order to really make this conversation ongoing, just as China, I'm sure, is going to have to give a little ground, especially when we think about the issue of trade and tariffs that are in place, that were put in place under the prior administration, under President Trump, that the Biden administration has made a decision not to lift. And that doesn't seem like it's coming anytime soon. How big of a roadblock is that into the actual normalization of this relationship?
It's not an accident that you don't hear about the trade war, right? I mean, that was the previous administration's first, second, and third talking point. I think the Biden administration is trying to expand beyond that, trying to, establish a means for communication on these kind of larger geopolitical national security issues that we have. And I think that they're going to continue to do that. So trade is definitely important. I don't know whether there's going to be lifting of the tariffs anytime soon. I can't imagine it. It doesn't even seem to be in conversation right now.
How come they aren't doing a bilateral news conference, Amy? Is that just still too much to ask for this relationship and for the Chinese government?
I think so. I mean, both of these presidents have domestic audiences that are very skeptical at best when it comes to China. And a joint news conference might just be too much to ask. I mean, it is really interesting to see that that's where we are. when you think about the history of this relationship and the number of opportunities we've had to get the two presidents together. But yeah, I think a joint press conference is too much to ask at this point.
All right. Well, we'll wait to hear from President Biden later this evening. Bloomberg will, of course, be bringing our audience those remarks live, just like we brought this conversation. So thank you very much, Amy, for joining us. Amy Gadsden, Executive Director of China Initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania. We appreciate it. Now, coming up, we'll speak with Congressman French Hill, the Republican from Arkansas. He'll be joining the show with his thoughts on the continuing resolution that passed his chamber last night and what happens between now and January 19th. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
It doesn't resolve any of the underlying issues. The House and the Senate are still $100 billion apart from each other in terms of how much we should spend in the discretionary accounts over the upcoming fiscal year. It creates two deadlines. It's not clear to me that this is going to materially change the result in terms of the final result. The final answer is going to be something bipartisan. We've just delayed that day of reckoning.
Rohit Kumar of PwC talking with us yesterday at the table here on Balance of Power about the resolution to keep funding the government through the end of the year. Let's bring in Republican Congressman French Hill of Arkansas for his take on this and a number of issues swirling around the Capitol. It's nice to you must be the last member of the House left in Washington, Congressman, so we salute you. I wonder your thoughts on what we just heard. I know there's a sense of relief here. We are avoiding a shutdown, it does appear, at the end of this week, but a lot of folks are saying we simply prolonged a shutdown, the inevitable shutdown, until January, because the House, the Senate, even members of the Republican conference in the House are simply not agreeing on where to go forward here. How do you see it?
Well, Joe, it's good to be with you. I think there are three key takeaways from the two-step continuing resolution process that passed the House yesterday. First, and perhaps most importantly, we have collectively, both in the House and Senate, agreed that we're not going to have the perennial Christmas omnibus spending bill where all the unfinished work on appropriations is dumped into one giant multi-thousand-page bill and then crammed down on House and Senate members trying to get home for Christmas. That's point one. Point two is, yes, it's a two-step process, but that offers the opportunity for senators and House members to take on some of the spending bills that we've already passed. The House has passed almost 80% of spending across our House floor, and get those bills done by early January. This gets us the time necessary to do that drafting and do those conference decisions, which include the top line spending number that was debated. And then I'd say finally, it really is good, in my opinion, that both the House and Senate agreed. So I don't view it as all negative. I view the cup as half full at this stage.
Okay, Congressman, but when we think about the timeline here, as these are conversations that need to be had about spending levels, we're relitigating conversations that were had about spending levels and were actually agreed to back in May with the debt ceiling deal. Why would we be relitigating them now? Do you think that is wise, or should that largely be stuck to, make it a little easier on everyone, maybe?
Well, I think the Fiscal Responsibility Act levels, the so-called FRA spending levels, are probably close to where we will end up. And I think that could have been decided earlier. That's true. But individual members wanted to go to each of those appropriations bills and look at each bill from the bottom up and try to cut as much spending as they could, given the avalanche of spending since the pandemic. So I understand their pressure. But more likely than not, we'll end up somewhere near that FRA level, and we'll get some conservative policy wins. And we do that by having worked hard to pass as many of those bills through committee and most on the House floor.
Mm-hmm. There's still a pretty long punch list, Congressman. Once we deal with funding the government, let's say we avoid the shutdown here, everything gets done in the new year. You've still got the NDAA to deal with, the matter of Israel and Ukraine funding. And I know something that is important to you as someone who serves on the Intelligence Committee, and that's the renewal of the FISA 702 warrantless spying program. Is that going to be renewed by the end of the year, or is that too controversial for Congress to manage right now?
Well, Joe, we take one holiday at a time, and right now we're celebrating the fact that we're going to see Thanksgiving and not be in Washington, so that's a good thing. We're hopeful that Christmas is the same, so we'll see if we can make it to Groundhog Day and get some of this work done. But seriously, we will, in my view, have consensus on both spending for Ukraine and Israel on a bicameral basis and get something to the president, I hope, before year end, but certainly not, if not then, early in the new year. And this gives us time to work on that separate from the big appropriation measure itself. And on FISA 702, that expires at 12/31 of this year. Then I'm very opposed to it expiring. And I've told that to Speaker Johnson, and I have a commitment from Speaker Johnson that we will find a way to extend it while we have bipartisan, bicameral reforms to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and how 702 is used and the safeguards around it. I expect we will have strong bipartisan reforms there. People don't like what happened in 2016 or in 2020 vis-a-vis the use of FISA. We've taken a lot of testimony on it, and I think we'll have a much better, much reformed, much better overseen program.
Just to return quickly, Congressman, to the issue you were mentioning when it comes to Israel and Ukraine funding, your hope that all of this may be sorted out by year end. We were speaking with Senator Tom Tillis, a fellow Republican, earlier on in the show, and I asked him if the Senate sends something to the House that ties everything together, does he have confidence that Mike Johnson will put it on the floor? He said he hopes so. Do you share that view?
I do. I do. I'll just simply share the hope because the House's preferred strategy.
What about the likelihood, Congressman?
Well, look, it's what I'm going to say is it's likely that we'll have a strong bipartisan support to pass the needed funding for Israel, the needed funding for Ukraine, and the needed funding to support our ally Taiwan in the South China Sea. I can't tell you how that road is going to be accomplished, but I know that's where it's going to end up. And I hope both the House and Senate have their own quality control and targeted spending in review of Joe Biden's supplemental request. I know I've been in a lot of meetings with administration officials on that, and we want to fine-tune it and get it directed, we think, in the most effective way for all three countries who are strong allies of the United States.
I wonder if every member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, like yourself, Congressman, will be watching and listening to the president later when he holds this news conference following his meeting with President Xi. How important will the message from the White House be tonight?
Well, it's very important that we hear from the president and see what he learned from the bilateral with the Chinese communist leader, Xi. I think people are very concerned about the direction that might take, but we want to hear from the president. We have our own China committee, select committee here in Congress. It's a bipartisan committee that's assessing what is the best American strategy to counter the malevolent activities of China economically, diplomatically, and in national security. So we're always interested to hear what the president has to say on that topic, and if there's been any movement in the Chinese towards these important topics that we've raised many, many times and not gotten a very satisfactory answer from Chinese leadership.
All right, Congressman French Hill of Arkansas joining us from Washington this evening. If we don't see you beforehand, have a happy Thanksgiving, safe travels home. We really appreciate your time. Now, coming up, we're going to have more on those highly anticipated talks between President Biden and China's Xi Jinping. They've wrapped up in San Francisco. What happened? We'll have more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
I value our conversation because I think it's paramount that you and I understand each other clearly, leader to leader, with no misconceptions or miscommunication. We have to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict.
That was President Biden earlier today speaking with China's Xi Jinping. We're expecting the president to have a news conference later on this evening. For more, let's bring in our political panel, Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, and Mara Gillespie of Blue Stack Strategies. Jeannie, just to begin with you, as we await the president's read, or at least what he will say about his meeting with Xi Jinping that happened today, how does he need to straddle the line to make it seem like he has a foreign policy win here, but also not do anything to make angry the many China hawks he has to deal with at home?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very difficult for him to quiet the criticism. After all, we're going into an election year. We've already heard people like Nikki Haley say that he was practically begging for this meeting. So I think he realizes that criticism is to be expected. I think what he's got to do is be honest about the very modest but critically important issues at stake here. And I think he has something very important going for him. As we've been watching the Chinese state media, they have been very, very positive about this meeting, which I think supports what the president has been saying and what most Chinese scholars have been arguing, people who study China rather, is that this is a competitive relationship, one of the most competitive historically ever, but neither nation can survive without the other, regardless of who is president. And that is why this meeting and these talks and opening up communication, especially military to military, is so critically valuable. So just the meeting itself in that perspective is a real win for the administration and, quite frankly, for China and Xi Jinping.
How does that hit you, Maura, knowing that hating on China has been one of the most popular bipartisan activities that we have in Washington? What's the chairman of the China Select Committee going to say tomorrow after he sees Joe Biden stand alone in that news conference tonight?
They're going to hit on a lot of things, especially not just the economy aspect, which we saw during the pandemic, our reliance on China and the way that they were manipulating that. And so you saw a lot of legislation. My former boss introduced legislation to make things here at home or in our hemisphere because of our supply chain vulnerabilities we saw during the pandemic. So coupling that with the human rights aspect of things and the foreign policy problems with China, looking at Taiwan, and also their backing of Russia and their partnerships and their friendships with Iran and Russia. That can't be overlooked. So the Republicans are going to hit on those issues when it comes to President Biden's, meeting today.
Yeah, as we've seen at pretty much each and every Republican primary debate, the issue of China looms very large in terms of foreign policy issues. But, Jeannie, it raises the question always of how much the American voter really considers foreign policy when they're heading to the polls. Yes, this is an opportunity for an incumbent president to look very presidential as he meets with a foreign leader. It's incredibly high profile, but how does it actually resonate with those who are deciding if they want him to have a second term when they go to the ballot box?
Yeah, historically, voters won't take foreign policy into account much at all. We see the polls and we see that as you compare it to something that they do take into account, like the economy, for instance, or safety, security, and crime, it is usually far down the list. That, of course, changes if we have boots on the ground, which we don't. That said, of course, our relationship with China is critical to many things that voters care about. And the number one issue they care about is the economy. We depend on our relationship with China in order to ensure that we have a healthy economy. So that is something that people may take into account in that respect. But directly, it won't matter as much as like the economy or something else. So the Biden team knows that, but they also know that this is critically important to what the president promised to do when he was running last time, and he is intent on keeping that promise.
Well, as we consider what's important to voters right now, we're wondering if they might have a longer menu to choose from, as we heard today from the senator, at least for now. From West Virginia, Joe Manchin asked on NBC about whether he is in fact considering a run, likely a third-party run for president. Here's what he said.
Are you considering running for president?
I will do anything I can to help my country.
Is that a yes?
And you're saying, does that mean you would consider it? Absolutely. Every American should consider. If they're in a position to help save the country, I think we're on the wrong course. So I will do everything possible.
Maura, I don't know if we're reading too far into those comments. He didn't say he's running, but people certainly are listening to anything that Joe Manchin says right now that he's said he's not running for re-election to the Senate. If he decides to do that, does that mean a re-election of Donald Trump?
Very likely. I mean, it's going to hurt the Democrats. It's going to hurt Joe Biden because largely those are votes that he would have normally got. Because whether people are super enthusiastic about Joe Biden, I don't think they are, but it's what's the alternative? And so they will tend to vote for Joe Biden because the alternative is Donald Trump. And with Joe Manchin in the field, that creates another opportunity for them. And I don't think it'll pull enough Republicans to vote Democrat.
Yeah, it does, Maura, seem like it is going to be Donald Trump. He's the presumptive Republican nominee at this point. But we also are looking at some polling that shows Nikki Haley is gaining strength in New Hampshire, which, by the way, announced the date of its primary today, January 23rd, about a week after the Iowa caucuses. But this Emerson poll that came out today shows Trump at 49, Nikki Haley up 14 points to 18%. In fourth is Governor Ron DeSantis at 7%. And I just wonder, what's the most significant part of that? The fact that Nikki Haley is ascendant, or the fact that even with that gain, she still remains more than 30 points behind the former president?
I think the momentum is a positive sign of the party. And New Hampshire is interesting as well because they're a little bit more moderate. They're not looking at, you're not seeing a whole big MAGA wing there. They're largely in polls from last month or 2 months ago now had said they would choose anyone but Donald Trump. So Kristen Newt had talked about it in an op-ed in New York Times, op-ed he did 2 months ago. But I think that's an interesting part of it. Nikki Haley did really well. She's done really well during the debates. And she's presented herself as someone who has a strong handle on the issues, especially when it comes to foreign policy. And people seem to be responding to that. Again, it's going to be tough to topple Trump in the polls. But I remain hopeful because I can't really imagine a country that has 330 million plus people and 2 senior citizens are our best and brightest and deserve to be in the White House. Absolutely not. These can't possibly be the best that we have to offer.
What does this mean for Ron DeSantis in this New Hampshire poll? Jeannie, the headline clearly is Nikki Haley vaulting into second place. But how about the man who was once a presumptive nominee for many people, falling to fourth behind Chris Christie in New Hampshire? Is this over?
In New Hampshire, it looks like it may be over. He did get that endorsement from the Iowa governor. That doesn't seem to have helped him much in the polls. By all accounts, he will stay in this thing through Iowa. But, at some point, these folks are going to have to think about if they really do want to be president and are not running for vice president, they've got to take on Donald Trump, and that requires consolidation. So Ron DeSantis, Chris Christie, Vivek Ramaswamy, they are all going to have to make a difficult decision. And I think New Hampshire is interesting because the governor there is one of the big people to make that case, and he may issue an endorsement at some point or speak quietly to some of these folks and say it is time to get out. I also have to say I love the fact that Joe Manchin says everybody should consider running for president, apparently.
Yes,
I'm not
indeed.
sure that's a good advice, but it's interesting the senator from West Virginia feels that way.
Well, I hope Jeannie and Maura are both considering it right now because somebody's got to save us. Coming up, it's a race to try to avoid a government shutdown, and it looks like that will be accomplished. We'll dive into the latest with our political panel next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
What we need to do is avoid the government shutdown. Why? Because that would unduly harm the American people. This allows us as conservatives to go into the fight on the next stages of this, to talk about real border changes, policies at the border, to close the southern border, to get it under control, to talk about the oversight that's necessary on additional Ukraine aid, to get Israel done if they don't do it as we beg them to do. All these other matters in the supplemental, that puts us in the policy discussion, and we'll have stringent fights on principle and philosophy and cuts as well.
House Speaker Mike Johnson speaking with reporters yesterday. I guess I got the memo on the uniform here. We bring back our political panel. Maura Gillespie of Blue Stack Strategies joins, along with Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, Bloomberg Politics contributor. So we live to fight another day here, Maura, but it looks like everyone is just planning to shut it down at the beginning of next year. When you consider the number of Republicans who voted against the CR yesterday, what does that tell you about a vote on a real budget?
Mike Johnson's going to have to work across the aisle to get this done again. Probably not to those extreme numbers, but he's going to have to be reasonable. And that's not really something that we're seeing right now with the Republican conference, an appetite to be reasonable, unfortunately. So January 19th is going to be not much time, really, when you think about how much time we have left in the session to then prepare for a January 19th deadline. And again, you have this brand new speaker who has not been in this position or any kind of true leadership position to do this.
And he's in this position because the last speaker was ousted because he passed a clean CR with Democratic support, which is exactly what Mike Johnson just did. It seems like Republicans are saying we're going to give him a little bit more grace here, but I just wonder how far that extends. Do you think he's going to be able to make it all the way through 2024 when a spending fight has to happen right at the beginning of it?
I don't know how tired members of Congress are about the whole speaker fight. Again, they've been talking about having worked for 10 weeks, which to the American people is probably going to sound pretty lame, as that they're so tired after 10 weeks of work. But I do think that he's going to have to prepare himself for what comes in January, because especially when it comes to our foreign policy and our foreign aid, those are non-negotiables for some members, and especially members of the Republican Party as well, who feel really strongly about making sure we support our allies. So there are going to be a lot of divides there that he's going to have to figure out how to step over and kind of come to an agreement on.
To what extent can the White House lead on this, Jeannie, or is this really a matter for Congress to deal with at this point? The supplemental request has already been made. Should it be rewritten, reframed somehow by the administration?
You know, it has been made. The reality is that nothing has changed. And far be it for me to accuse the new speaker of being Pollyannish, but I'm listening to him talk in that clip you just played. What is he talking about? He's saying something has changed. So in the next 21 legislative days before this CR runs out, they are magically going to have what? The power to force this through, to force these draconian cuts they want through. It's not going to happen. And he couples that yesterday with promising no more CRs unless he has another, 50 Republicans in his pocket that are going to vote, which he does not. This thing is going to go down the way it has to. Maura is right. It's going to be, and it has to be.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Maura Gillespie, thank you both so much for joining us this evening. And of course, Joe, we are expecting the Senate is going to take a vote on this thing tonight. Of course, we'll have coverage of that and more. Washington Edition newsletter always on the terminal and online.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll see you back here tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.